Hey, everybody, welcome to Matt Men, your source for all things professional wrestling. I'm Andrew Zarian, and today we're continuing our series on a gigantic event that happened 20 years ago in the world of professional wrestling, and that was the demise of WCW. And who better to come here? My boss. I would consider this man my boss, and the author.
Not this again. Vinny does that same thing, and it's just not right.
The author of Death of WCW, Bryan Alvarez. Bryan, 20 years. 20 years ago, this whole thing happened, and I've actually been reliving the demise aspect of this. Well, I've been listening to a lot of archived Observer episodes from 2001 that I got my hands on, and I pretty much have everything from like the 17th to June right now that I'm sitting on. I'm listening as the days go by. I want to know, what was it like for you being in the middle of that, covering it?
Are you talking about the Yada shows? I guess
the
you have
Yada
to be
shows.
talking about the Yada shows.
Yeah.
Dude, that's so long ago, I don't even remember. I mean, my memories of Yada when it went out of business and I was in poverty. But, I mean, I've done 12,000 radio shows, so trying to remember the ones I did in 2001 is not... I remember we used to, like, get WCW guests on all the time, and they would come on and they would bury WCW. They'd be doing the show, like, a couple hours before Nitro went on the air. They'd be talking about how this sucked and that sucked, and very different than today.
Tremendously different than today. Actually, the episode I listened to last night after the pay-per-view, because I was doing some work after the pay-per-view, and I was listening, and I believe a caller called in and said to Dave, does this mean you're not getting any more WCW wrestlers on the show? And that was pretty much it, right?
Yeah, we never got another WCW wrestler on the show again, and we rarely get the WWE wrestlers, but I mean, I guess one of the differences today is we can actually get wrestlers from AEW or Ring of Honor, and they don't come on and bury the promotion. So
it's amazing.
I guess those places are doing a little better than WCW was in its dying days.
Talking about the dying days of WCW, I highly recommend you guys check this book out. This is like my fourth copy of this, because they tend to go missing from my house every time somebody comes into the studio that loves professional wrestling. Also available on audiobook. Not that I'm plugging this right now, and we have a deal to plug it, but I truly think it's a great historic account of everything that happened. But, we got a couple of minutes here, and I really want to talk about this with you. What do you think we learned from this? Did we learn over the last 20 years that it wasn't? Do you believe that it was one thing that affected the closure of WCW? Do you think it was just a multitude of series of terrible events that caused this company to go under?
Well, obviously it was a series of terrible events, but I mean, the one event that surpasses all other events is that when you're running a company, you've got to make money. That's it.
Yeah.
And there was pre WWE going public, pre WCW, and then there was post. Okay, and obviously, like pre WCW, if you were a promoter, what you did was you promoted events and you sold tickets, and you either made money and stayed in business, or you lost money and you went out of business. And one of the reasons that Ted Turner originally bought the Crockett territory was because they lost money and they were going out of business. So he bought it, and of course he had a lot of money, and his whole deal was, well, we're gonna keep this thing going. It doesn't matter if it loses money. This was something that that helped kick off the Superstation TBS in the late 70s. I'm always going to keep this thing alive, no matter how much money it loses. And people wanted to shut it down, and he was like, no, I'm not going to shut it down.
Multiple times, right? Multiple times.
So then eventually, Ted Turner lost power. And, everyone blames the AOL Time Warner merger. And, I mean, to a degree, that was correct, because once Ted Turner did not have this power, he could not save World Championship Wrestling. But the reality is, if World Championship Wrestling had been a profitable company, if they'd been doing good numbers, I mean, they wouldn't have gone out of business, but they lost millions and millions and millions of dollars. And you bring in somebody that doesn't like wrestling. He looks at the paper. He's like, dear God, they lost $62 million. They're out of there. So from that point forward, I mean, if you most of the major wrestling companies like WWE had gone public, and so they were making plenty of money. Then the era of rights fees came into the picture, and once rights fees came into the picture, I mean, WWE today they make so much money on rights fees, and they've also gone public. I mean, you can run a show and sell no tickets, and it doesn't matter.
We
You
saw that in their
can
reports, right?
Yeah, you can run a pay-per-view and nobody buys it and it doesn't matter. It's a different era today than it was back then. AEW, I mean, yes, they're owned by the Khan family, but the Khan family, when this whole thing started, I mean, there was an annual budget. And so AEW must survive based on what they bring in TV rights fees and in revenue and pay-per-views. Now, luckily for them, they did well on television. They got a brand new television deal. They're making a lot of money off that television deal, and they're also selling a lot of pay-per-view. So for the time being, they're doing fine. But, it's just at the end of the day, nowadays, it's all about, can you get a television rights fee deal, or can you get a Sinclair to basically buy you and make sure that you stay on the air, and so it doesn't really matter whether you sell tickets or not. But back in the day, it was all about selling tickets and running a business. And if you could not do that, you died.
And that's exactly what happened with WCW. Is there, in the 20
Well,
year
actually, if you think about it, the story of NWA and World Championship Wrestling is the Crockett territory was a territory where they needed to sell tickets and basically generate revenue from the fans to survive. They failed at that. Ted Turner bought it, and it became a situation where that didn't happen. You didn't have to sell tickets. You didn't have to do great pay-per-view numbers. You were going to survive because of the parent company. And then when Turner lost power, it went right back to the model it was before, which they needed to sell pay-per-views. They needed to generate revenue through ticket sales. They once again did none of those things, and we went full circle, and they went out of business again, and there was no new Ted Turner to buy them. That is actually the story of World Championship Wrestling.
That really is. And in a weird turn of events, right before the quarantine happened, I was at a bar in New York City, and there was a guy sitting next to me in a suit, and he had his Time Warner Media badge on him. I'm like, oh, you work from Warner Media? He's like, yeah. And then we started talking, and we started talking about wrestling, and his exact words were, oh, I was there throughout the merger. I'm one of the few people that still survived that merger. And everybody would say WCW was on Ted Turner's scholarship. And when the day came, everybody said that scholarship ran out. And that was the big joke with amongst, the sales team over there, that it was literally Ted Turner's pet project. No matter what happened, it was going to continue going. But obviously, this is a great example of what happens with mergers and acquisitions. You're never really safe when that happens. And that's really the biggest story here. Is there, coming full circle 20 years later, wrestling on TNT, highly competitive product. Not that it's competing with WWE as far as ratings go currently. They're close, but the fact that we're back to this, it doesn't that amaze you sometimes? I mean, we cover this. You've been covering it way longer, but there is something interesting about the fact that TNT's back into wrestling. It's very competitive. We're back into this war type environment. Not that I encourage it online. I think it's ridiculous, but it's fascinating how 20 years have gone by and we're back to where we were.
Well, we're kind of back to where we were in the sense that the show is on TNT. But I mean, if you're talking about like another national, another wrestling promotion that is national, that has national cable television. I mean, we had that with Impact. And I think people see this today as more like the 90s. Because WWE decided, well, we're going to get a USA Network deal for NXT, and we're going to do a head-to-head battle. But I mean, other than that, I mean, what this is basically what happened with TNA. The difference is these people are significantly more competent than Dixie Carter and Vince Russo were.
God, I hope that stays.
Well, it would be difficult to match the ineptitude of the other company, but. I mean, if you look at it today, I mean, it's basically as if we're starting over the Impact era again, but doing it right. I know some people are huge fans of TNA, but I mean, TNA, I mean, they're in business for the very same reason that WCW, or they were in business, for the same reason that WCW ended up in business after they almost went out of business. Their original idea was horrible. We're going to run weekly pay-per-views and charge people $10 a week.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone knew going in, except for the people that had the money. Everybody knew this was going to be a disaster. It was a disaster. They were about to file for bankruptcy and put the whole thing out of business. And then Dixie Carter showed up and said, my dad's got money. And so then they survived for a long time. But I mean, they had Spike TV, which if people don't remember, I mean, Spike TV, that was like the,
a
whatever
big
you
channel.
It
was the premier
more like
men's
the fight channel. I mean, you had UFC on there, you had Impact, and for a few years, like Impact was doing well, but they were full of ineptitude, and it never became what it could. This AEW is in many ways doing significantly better. I mean, from day one, I mean, they have sold more pay-per-views than Impact in their entire history ever sold on a regular basis. Like,
is that amazing?
The record for Impact was the 60,000 they did for Kurt Angle versus Samoa Joe 2 times. They never beat that, and they never approached it again. AEW has done significantly more pay-per-view buys for every single show. They have not done one show lower than that, and that's during a period where everyone's like, nobody's going to pay money for pay-per-views again. Pay-per-view is a dead industry. Fans are used to paying $9.99. I heard all of it. Wasn't true. So they're already head and shoulders above what Impact was doing.
Listen, the reality is if that is true, then you would not see these monster buy rates for a, Canelo Alvarez fight or a Conor McGregor fight or anything that UFC is doing. Consistently they're able to get 1 million buys on mega pay-per-views, and it's a fascinating thing that we're in this era where people don't buy pay-per-views, but people are if it's good enough. 125,000 to 150,000 buys at $59 a month or $59 for the show or $49 is tremendous. And I feel like there is always going to be that comparison with a number 2 product, especially with having, a Sting there or a Jericho there or having a lot of those guys that were part of WCW. But it's a very different world that we're in. I don't necessarily feel the same about how they're utilizing their older talent versus WWE, but there is a lesson to be learned from what WCW did. And I think, looking at what AEW is doing and knowing some people there, they are very self-aware about all these issues that you bring up with Dave or we discuss on Mat Men about how utilizing these guys is crucial, right?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, they need to make money and they need to survive or they're going to go out of business. So, I mean, you look at the Fastlane pay-per-view last night, and I mean, I thought the main event was great. I thought the Sheamus Drew McIntyre match was great. But at the end of the day, I mean, there was blatant false advertising.
Yeah.
There were unsatisfying finishes, and it doesn't matter. It absolutely does not matter what they do. They can do whatever they want. Oh, the people love or hate the Alexa thing, doesn't matter. We're going to do it because we want to. None of this matters. Whereas in AEW, this all matters. You run those fans off, you run people off TNT, you run people off so they don't want to buy pay-per-views, you're out of business. It's not that way for WWE right now. Perhaps someday it will be like that for AEW. Perhaps someday they'll have TV deals where they could do whatever they want and it doesn't matter.
I hope not.
And I mean, if that happens, there's no guarantee that they're just going to do whatever. I mean, they may still want to try to have a good product, but at the end of the day, when you are in the position that they're in right now, you have to learn lessons from the past. And at the end of the day, you have to be a business. It's just like the pay-per-view thing we were talking about. If you're a fan and you want to believe whatever you want to believe, that's fine. But it's a business and it is a product. And if you present a product that people want to pay $50 for, they are going to pay $50 for it.
Yeah.
There is no black and white. Nobody buys pay-per-views. There is no black and white. Nobody's going to pay $50 when they can get the network for $9. If you put on a pay-per-view that people want to see, they will pay $100 to watch that pay-per-view. That's the end of the story.
Before I let you go, I know it was a quick It was a quick 15-minute hit here. Well, we're interviewing so many people about WCW
Yeah,
right now
of
this
technical
week.
difficulties
Technical
on my
difficulties.
end.
Yeah.
Golly.
It's all right. It happens. Listen, I deal with it all the time. If because for me, I find the old shows that you did Observe Alive with Dave very interesting because there's so many of these moments that you guys are discussing that happen in WCW. You're like, that's really crappy. Was there one moment for you looking back? You're like, oh, there's no coming back from this.
I would say one moment, no. I mean, even going back and I went back and rewatched every Nitro because I'm a miserable
Masochist.
person.
Yeah,
I'm
and
a
I followed
masochist.
along with you, by the way, throughout that journey.
Yes, what a dumb thing we did. But I went back and watched it, and even watching it back a second time, I mean, there was no, well, that's it, everybody. I mean, that was the moment right there. It was a steady string of horrible things that happened. It was just chipping away at my psyche. It was chipping away at me to the point where I would watch the show and go, who could possibly still be watching this show? And of course, I was paid to do it. So
you were still doing it.
Yeah, I mean, there was no one thing. I mean, I could look at certain things and go, yeah, that was a disaster. Yeah, that was in the top 10. But I mean, one thing, there's never one thing that drives everybody off. Everybody has a different thing that is their breaking point.
Going back to my teenage self, I distinctly remember the No Limit Soldiers being the moment for me where I said, this is utter shit. This is I can't even flip back and forth no matter how nuts Scott Steiner's promos are going to be. I can't come back to this. And that and the Kiss Demon and all that wacky stuff that they did, that was it for me. And I didn't turn back.
Well, you know, I when they put that belt on Miz, I
felt it.
I mean, if I didn't do this for a living, I mean, that was the day that I'm out of here.
The first time or the second
I'm
time?
Out of here. This time that was like 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I sat through the pandemic era and it sucked, but at least, like, they tried everything in their power to make Drew McIntyre a believable champion. And he beat everybody, and they booked him well. And meanwhile, there's this Miz that had 2 wins in the entire year he had 2 wins, and he was a comedy geek. And they put that belt on him, and I was like, dude, I'm out of here. I am out of here. That was it for me. But you know what? If the product would have been great, that wouldn't have happened. Yeah. That's my point with World Championship Wrestling. If the product had been great, there's never one thing that drives everybody off. But when the product is not great, and dude, I put up with the Fiend and Hell in a Cell, and I put up with the Alexa stuff, and I put up with all of this terrible stuff, and then they put the belt on the Miz. That's like a breaking point after a bunch of really horrible things. That's what happened with World Championship Wrestling. Everybody had a different breaking point that they wouldn't have had if it would have been good. You never hear somebody go, oh, man, I was a big fan of Nitro in 95, and then something happened and I quit. Nobody quit in 95. They quit in 98, 99, 2000. They quit when it was already horrible, and then there was one terrible thing that set them off.
With that said, Bryan, very much appreciate you taking your time and trying to fix your computer and coming on.
I did fix it, damn it.
Always a pleasure. Everybody, Bryan Alvarez, f4wonline.com. I don't even have to do a introduction or an outro to you. Listen, just head on over to WrestlingObserver.com and check out the bajillion things Bryan's doing. And us, Matt Men's on there now. So there you go, one big happy family. We get a little nuts, though, sometimes, so it's fine. It's okay.
Well, I got a little nuts yesterday, so I.
All right, guys, that's it. See you later.